SPJIMR Centre for Wisdom and Leadership presents its podcast series, Sapience. It is about the practical aspects of a wisdom-based approach on leadership, various global and societal issues.
Neha, welcome to this new episode of this podcast Sapience by CWIL. I'm very happy to have you because we met recently and we found a lot of common domains of interest. So this is an occasion for me to bring this forward. And the second reason is that I discovered that you published recently a book and that could form the anchor of this conversation. The book that you just published 1 month ago is called Thriving in Disruptions. We'll use some passages and some elements which can suit these discussions. So welcome again, Neha, and let's start.
Thank you so much, Surya. It's a great pleasure to be with you here today.
Okay. So Neha, I am curious, and this is a question I always ask when there is either a new research paper or a book or whatever. How did the idea of coming with this book about this particular subject come to you?
Yeah, I think we know it's a process to come to writing a book.
Yeah.
And I think in particular, in this case, it was embedded. It comes with the 10th anniversary of my working as an independent organizational psychologist. So it's an
Okay.
interesting timeline as well.
Okay.
But it comes with the observations I've made in these 10 years, many of which I felt were about pain and anxiety at the workplace, which is maybe when I really get called in. So that's what I get to see, which I felt was somehow unnecessary, for lack of a better word, right? That I felt there was some twistedness and pain associated with work, which I think was misplaced. And hence, I felt I needed to write a book that was easy to read, hands-on, with a little bit of humor, a little bit of tongue in cheek, but at the same time reflective and provocative, and to make it accessible to a large number of people because we all work. It's actually the center of our lives in many ways. I think that's where we spend the second largest or maybe the first largest amount of time aside from
Absolutely.
sleeping,
Yeah.
right? So it's such an important place. And I don't believe in the binaries of, work life and so on. I think work seeps into a lot of areas of our life. And so it should be joyful and creative and not as painful as I've sometimes experienced it. So that was the motivation for the book, which of course is also embedded in a lot of experience and also attempts, I think, and I hope successfully, because some publishers didn't want to have it. They said it wasn't academic enough. Others said it was too academic. I hope it bridges a little bit some of the academic theory and the behavioral science we have into a framework that is interesting and provocative for the practitioner scholar.
Yeah. Absolutely. This is what I was very pleasantly surprised about. Because sometimes the academics and in some way there is some jargon and a lot of theory, sometimes not always practiced, even though the ideas are brilliant. So there are some people, for example, who do not have this background that you have. So it comes through the book in a very gentle and appropriate way. Of course, there are some references, but it's not all over and making the book impossible to read. And really, that is something that I appreciate, this style that you have between balancing these two aspects. At the same time, Neha, you say that this is not another management book. So what does it mean? Can we understand the purpose you had? And the purpose of any management book will not be to make workplaces more joyful and address suffering, right? But
No, it's fine that you pick up this very small sentence in the book.
well,
It's not another management book because it's actually not complete.
Ah,
So that sounds very interesting, right? In a
yeah.
way, because one would imagine one publishes a book that is complete and you can offer it to somebody and say, here, I found something and this is what you need to
The
do.
magic
But
formula.
actually this book is exactly not that in a line with the idea of agility, which is about intentional learning, right? And reoccurring intentional learning.
Mm.
The book is not complete. And it's only an offering for another opportunity of learning. And if I had had a choice, of course, and this is economically not sound, there would have
Mm.
been many empty pages inside the book for people to
Yeah.
continue writing in different places
Yeah.
or, to add some of their own ideas. And happily enough, as the book now slowly seeps onto the market because it's still very new, people are actually writing to me and telling me, oh, and when I read that, it reminded me of this in my career.
Yeah.
And I find this is an excellent response, right? Because I'm also gathering those responses to see what can come next or where the next book might come from. So
Lovely.
it's not a complete book. No? It's as simple as that.
So, what is the major contribution of this book? See, in ancient India, before you brought about a new book, imagine that this is a time where there were not big printing presses and so on. There were only palm leaves, and people would have to write down on palm leaves. So, the distribution of these ideas in the form of a book would be done by copying them into as many copies of palm leaves. And so now any new book or treatise coming would have to go, for this reason, through a kind of council, a kind of wise council. So let's imagine that you're in front of this council in ancient India. So what would you say to this council? Is it really an addition that you're bringing? What is your contribution, really speaking?
Let me explore this
Yeah.
council of wise persons
Oh,
as a dancer, because in dancer we also talk about bhavarasa. No,
yeah.
what is the emotion that I am depicting, and what is the emotion it is actually inducing in
Great.
you as an observer.
Oh,
So let me use this, if you like,
okay.
to explain the book. So in terms of content,
Mm.
which is maybe the emotion that I am taking as a author or as a presenter of my ideas,
Mm.
the content is really to simplify concepts that I think have been overhyped also, like agility is a concept that has been completely overhyped. And in the meantime, nobody really understands what is meant by that. Isn't it something about fast, and isn't it something about flexibility and so on? And then you discover actually it's about learning and how we leverage knowledge and create knowledge together, or collective leadership. Isn't that a laissez-faire? Isn't that a chaos, etc.? So
Mm.
the first thing is it's about breaking down these hyped complex
Yeah.
concepts into simple forms that are applicable. But the emotion that I hope it actually provokes in the reader, aside from the content, is the enthusiasm,
Mm.
enthusiasm to explore further, right? The delight of reading the book, being able to relate to it, and finally to have the courage and the enthusiasm to explore these concepts that we accept in management practice,
Mm.
especially when it comes to managing people in organizations, quite readily without actually questioning where they're coming from and what the assumptions are behind them.
So, what is coming repeatedly in your book throughout many of the chapters is that you are challenging common notions, not just of agility, but collective leadership, and also many of the behavioral approaches to evaluating work performance. So, we'll look at this, but essentially, would it be right for me to say that, and this is the subtitle of the book, Collective Leadership and Agility, is this really the main focus of the book?
Yes, I would say it is, because I'm proposing that, and again, it's an assumption, it's an idea, so feel
Mm.
free to challenge me. But I'm proposing that if we want to find a way for organizations, and I mean organizations, I mean any group of people who sets out to do the same thing together.
Mm.
So organizations, communities, teams, you can call it what you want to call it. If we want to be able to thrive in an increasingly disruptive environment, we simply must find a way to work together. And of course, that increasingly disruptive environment is what we like to label as new work, right? When we talk about the technology and the way work will change. So yes, I think that's it in a nutshell.
Okay, great.
Okay, so now let's come to agility. You mentioned that you are challenging this word agility as a very hype word. And I agree with you. Yeah, it's all over. How are you looking at agility in the book?
It's the way we will work together. So because the concept of agility comes from software development, it is actually very process oriented. People are very focused on how do I introduce agility through processes.
Oh.
And basically what I'm saying is that what matters in agility is the knowledge you have in an organization, hopefully also then the wisdom as a follow to that knowledge, your ability to lever that knowledge in an organization, and also to co-create in situations that demand that. And when you understand that agility is all about knowledge and learning and continual learning, then you realize that the carriers of this are the human beings in the organization. And that it's not so much about the processes, but agile organizations simply must be human-centric organizations. And that the focus must be, if we want to be successful in managing disruption, on the people inside this organization, not only them, but also all the people who are connected to the organization. That includes customers, suppliers, and whoever else is in that ecosystem, I think is the word we use for that nowadays, right?
Right.
So it's not an organizational process-centric approach about, being fast and flexible and putting jigsaw pieces together in a different way. It's really about the people.
You say it's not a formula, it's not a methodology, it's not a template. So then what is it exactly? What do you propose?
At the end of the day, these are the carriers of your knowledge, so they cannot be just another resource. They are in themselves resourceful. And what I find quite interesting is that most organizations don't even know this resource that they have because of the way they recruit people in organizations that are against profiles. They don't know what else this person is able to do. So when finally you are in a situation where you need to grow a certain arm of your business or introduce new markets or new products, you go out looking for consultants when you could have somebody sitting right in front of your nose who is able to do it, but you simply don't know because you've never asked, you've never taken an interest in this person as a whole being. And maybe you have even made the mistake of never allowing them to develop other skills than those that are strictly pertaining to this one job that they are doing. And the sad part of that, of course, is the jobs themselves are developing. So actually, you should always be ahead of that curve, right? So it's actually a very hardcore management book in that sense, right? Because it's alerting organizations to the fact that they are actually missing out on the most valuable and also the easiest, if you like, accessible resource that they have right in front of their nose, and they're not using it, right? And it sounds very utilitarian when I say the word using, but as you know, in the book, I describe it as a certain collective partnership, and I align it to a football team.
Yeah, that is a fascinating part of your book. So let's go into this because you developed an imagery.
Because I think it makes it very clear
exactly.
what I'm actually saying, right?
Uh-huh.
So a football team knows very clearly that they can only win together, as they will also lose together. And you see their pain when somebody has to leave the field because of either an injury or because they have a penalty, they fouled. And you see the pain of the people left alone on the field, knowing that they are at a huge disadvantage. But they still need to make it happen. And in organizations, we we release people without thinking about that. So there's a bad behavior as well. The fact that we give people several hats, and we play around with empty positions and so on. You would never do that with a football team. That would be fatal, right? How could you ask the goalkeeper to also play the middle field at the same time? It's nonsense. So
Yeah.
I think, in sports, we see very clearly much more actionable agility items. The important thing is to remember that no organization can claim that they are agile, tick the box, and then, stop learning, stop training. It's just not possible. It's a process. It's a journey. And it's supposed to be fun, interesting, purposeful, and intentional. Right?
Wow. Okay.
And yeah.
Yeah.
Neha, can you spend a little bit more time and develop this analogy? And also, how can a football team be compared to an organization? It could be seen as a bit oversimplistic, right? And so, because do we have to win or to lose? And what is it that we have to win exactly in this game?
I know you prefer the analogy of a jazz group or Indian musicians, because you were the one who actually inspired this edition when I talked about winning or losing in the book, and it's there, and
Yeah.
that was inspired by you, Surya, and the conversation we had. I think, because I use the football team, of course, winning, scoring the goal, and getting the cup is the main ambition. But that can be traded for anything else. I mean, if you're in an NGO that says, let's not have any more hunger in the world, those are the goals you're trying to kick into the goal, so to speak, and your overall ambition of getting the cup is that somebody says one day there's no more hungry people in the world, and how fabulous would that be, right?
Mhm.
So I think that's tradable. What is not tradable is the fact that you have a common. Here's another word that's used quite often, but a common purpose,
Mm.
right? A common goal, that you have an agreement that this is what you're trying to do: shoot as many goals and win the tournament. You also need agreement on how you're going to do it. This is the
Right.
thing that people often forget. Like, football has a lot of rules to the game. Everybody agrees to play by the rules. That's why they're on the field,
Yeah.
right? And there will be referees, just like in the real world. There are compliance officers, etc. So we know that in the real business world they
Yeah.
exist as well.
Right.
So it's not a chaotic thing. Everybody on the team also has a role and a title. I'm not getting rid of those. They all exist. I mean, I could get rid of them too. It makes no difference, because at the end of the day, there's a responsibility for something you're supposed to be doing, but nobody is prevented from shooting a goal.
Right.
So, as I say in the book, if the goalkeeper feels he or she wants to dribble up front and shoot another goal, fair enough. It's allowed. It's probably very risky, but it's allowed, right? So
Correct.
nobody's prevented from contributing to the overall goal. They have their titles. Uh, but at the same time, although they assume a certain responsibility, they are all accountable for the final result, because they can only win or lose together. And I would love to see more teams in business who understand that concept, because it's equally true in the business world, right?
Yeah, so what about the hierarchy? Because in a football team, there is a captain. There is a captain, and there are players, and these players have all different positions on the field. But when you apply that to an organization, what does it mean exactly? Do you have to plan the whole thing, or is it okay to have a few levels of hierarchy? What is the relationship exactly?
So again, like we have said several times, I don't have the final answer for this.
Mhm.
I think it depends a little bit on the organization, and maybe even more so, it depends on, why do you have the hierarchy in the first place? What
Mhm.
is it useful for?
Mm.
And I'm not going to attempt to answer that question now, because I have seen many different kinds of organizations, from large public sector organizations to small startups, and
Right.
the raison d'être
Yeah.
of why an organization is structured the way it is will vary, but I invite organizations to question it. What is the usefulness of this hierarchy? And if you feel you need to keep it for some strange reason that I can't think of right off the top of my head, then maybe you need to consider at least delegating down to this lowest level where people can make decisions that affect their own work. I remember speaking to a CEO of an electronics company who did exactly that. It's not a large company, there were 150 or so people, but he said, honestly, it makes no sense when the shop floor asks me if they can buy something. I sign it off because I don't understand anyway whether they need it or not. So I've decided that to a large extent, they could just go ahead and do what they need to do in order to do their jobs. And I think this is what we need to look at, right? The practicality of having a hierarchy. Is it that we need to have so many departments so that we can eventually reward people for good work and then they become a department head? They never wanted to manage people. They don't like their people. They hide in their corner office and people are disgruntled and everybody's running after getting that corner office. What for? What is the purpose? Why can we not just reward people in a different way while they're actually working rather than dangling that corner office as a possible reward? So I say also in the book that I don't think structure might be a bit overrated.
Right.
I don't even know how many times an organization ever really looks at their organizational chart. Maybe when they decide they want to split the company or lay off a certain number of people or stop a certain production. But it goes patiently into people's drawers most of the time. And then you say, oh, we have an organizational chart. If it's not serving your purpose, just don't do it anymore, right?
Yeah.
I can't imagine a football team with a hierarchy. That would be so funny. What are people going to do? Are they going to ask the captain, may I shoot this goal now? I don't know. It's kind of strange. And then get, 4 eyes signatures on the corners of pages. I find it very obscure, right, to understand why we continue to work in this way. It's not serving. If it's serving, I'm happy to have hierarchies, but I don't see them serving.
Yeah.
They lead to silos and power games. And imagine a football team trying to trip your own player so that that player can't shoot the goal. It's absurd, right?
Yeah.
But these are things you see in organizations, and you wonder, like, how does that make sense at all?
Yeah.
How can we thrive if that's how we behave, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is a characteristic example of the approach you are adopting. So in fact, it seems that you are not there to give us, let's say, okay, this is how it works, and now restructure your organization with a minimum of 3 levels and no gaps of more than 5 from the lowest, and so on. You're not from this space. You are taking the reader to say, is it useful? What is the purpose? Does it serve your purpose or not? And it's an invitation to reflect and then, of course, if necessary, take some action. I just love this approach.
Yeah.
So I just want to add to that, Surya, with all respect, right? With all respect to the authors and
Of course.
researchers who have given their best input, which is contextual, in their time frame and also in their worldview.
Yeah.
So I really do respect all the authors I cite where I question. In fact, I also believe that many of them would probably continue to question because good researchers do that, right?
Absolutely.
Good researchers question their research, and there's
Yeah.
a fascinating part that I always like to read in the papers at the end called the limitations of this research, right? Or recommendations for further research. So I think the one that I love to cite, and I do it in my book, and I continue to cite it because it's so tangible and easy to understand, is of course Pavlov's experiments with his dog.
Oh.
And everybody knows about Pavlov's dog. Pavlov's dog actually informed, if you like, the foundation of behavioral science. And Pavlov did a whole series of experiments with the dog, with the bell and the food and the drooling of the dog, etc. And I just think that if we flipped it around and cited the cartoon that I cite in my book, where the dog actually says to, another friend dog in the room, look at what I can make Pavlov do. Every time I do something, he scribbles in his book. So this is what I'm actually asking people to do, flip the world view that they have. We need a world view. We need to have a frame, right?
Right.
But have the courage to flip it sometimes and to realize that indeed um, it's not sealed in stone maybe, and there's another point of view that is equally exciting. One thing I haven't said in the book, which I'm thinking about now as well, and this could be the next piece of work, is it's kind of intriguing, for example, when we look at cross-cultural this whole field of
Right.
cross-cultural management. All of the theories come from the Western Hemisphere in this respect.
Correct.
And I find it intriguing on different levels, right? As a psychologist, I'm wondering what is it with these people that they have the obsession of having to clarify everything they see in the world. And on the other hand, I'm thinking, how has the East not actually developed a framework? Don't they care at all? Or, do they have another way of dealing with this? So that's a whole another field of management, right? That has been completely dominated by Hofstede.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
people who cite Hofstede, despite the fact that they know the limitations of the actual study in IBM and so on, and that it's old and that it has a lot of assumptions and worldview issues in it
Mhm.
that need to be unfolded.
Mhm.
So that's what I'm thinking about at the moment, some new thoughts coming in, not in the book.
And I would like to take this as another myth or entrenched belief that we have in organization about how an organization works, how performance management has to work, and so on, and which take for granted. And being part of this self fabricating kind of prison then leads to consequences.
Yeah, it's I think it's one of the most provocative statements I make in the book, in fact,
Mm.
because I want to make my point
Yeah.
that we've spent, first of all, we don't even have a commonly agreed definition of what leadership is.
Correct. Yeah.
We talk about it a lot. We talk about it a lot. If you go onto Amazon, I think you will. At one point, Amazon stops counting the number of books on leadership, right? It gives you an infinite number somehow. So we don't actually even commonly agree on what we mean by it, which is understandable because it's a very complex phenomena,
Yeah.
actually. A lot of the debate on leadership has been around personal attributes and personality traits, etc. This is what I'm trying to knock a little bit when I make this statement, and to emphasize the interrelational aspect of leadership. Because at the end of the day, even it doesn't matter what it is you may think you achieve on your own, you have not done it on your own. That's impossible. We are not singular. I mean, even this podcast doesn't happen on its own, right? We're here together. The book does not happen on its own. Yes, maybe
Yes.
I wrote it, but it is inspired. And as you know, you inspired a part of it without you even knowing that you were inspiring a part of it at that time, because I didn't tell you in any point. And then I think afterwards, much later, I wrote you an email saying, the book is coming, and by the way, you are a part of it, which might have puzzled you. But I think it is impossible. Even the great leaders, they have had all kinds of people supporting them. So the bigger part of leadership is interrelational. Now, just to be very clear, in a certain way, collective leadership demands personal leadership, right? If we
Yeah.
think of the football team, each of those people, each of those players working hard, training hard, making a contribution, sincere in their purpose, playing by the rules, etc.
So, Neha, can you take one of them, whatever you would like to choose from your book? And since you are challenging them, I'm letting you choose whatever you'd like to start with.
Yeah.
Yes, but they will be using them to serve a
Ah.
team,
Okay. Yeah.
right? So I think let's be very honest about it. We are we are always in an ecosystem. We are always in a community, even when we uh, seclude ourselves and go into meditation or into retreat, right?
Yeah.
You are still the person you are. You are still the person with your parents, with your history, and so on. You never actually let go of this identity if you want to push it, to this very bottom line level. So my idea here is very much that instead of emphasizing individual attributes,
Yeah.
let us emphasize what we can actually do together in cohesion, respecting each other's contribution, no matter how different it might be. That is more the notion of collective leadership. And again, it doesn't mean that I'm not a crazy communist or something. It's not this. I'm not trying to
Right.
dismantle. I go on to say the collective leadership is an attitude, right? It's not a style. It's an attitude for inclusion. It's about realizing that in certain situations, I need to draw on people. Maybe I even need to give them the kind of how should I say, the project lead, or
Mm.
the right to decide, or I cannot possibly, in this world that is so complex and so confusing and so fast and disruptive, decide that no, only I have the answers and the wisdom to manage the situation. It's a really crazy thing to think. It's actually impossible, right?
Yeah.
To think that you can have that. So the collective leadership idea is not about neglecting individuals that develop themselves. Quite the contrary, I would say. Quite the contrary, because you need to have a high level of self-awareness to be able to pass the ball in the football team, right? And say, I'm not going to be able to shoot this goal. I need to pass the ball.
Mm.
Have a great scanning view on the field to notice where are my fellow players and who has the strengths that could be strategically important to pass the ball in the right way to hit the goal.
At this
Come
time,
back
at
from a
this
goal.
particular.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
At this moment,
Yeah.
in this moment,
Yeah.
it might be somebody else, and the next moment it will be somebody
Right.
else.
Mhm.
And the interesting thing also is to realize that shooting the goal is important, but saving the goal is equally important.
Right.
So again, organizations that put one set of people ahead of other sales teams, ahead of the back office, for example, it's a little bit sad. You're not developing the collective leadership that is needed to move ahead, right? You will have one or two great sales and, big parties that go with it, but it will not keep you floating in times that are difficult, because everybody needs to pull at the same time in those times.
Now, Neha, let's go into something which is at the heart of what I'm trying to grasp here, without arriving yet at any final conclusion. In the book, you say that to fully appreciate the idea of collective leadership, which enables agility, as defined in your terms, we need to move away from the idea that leadership is about the individual. So that is a very strong idea. And and even though, let's say, leadership books are now distinguishing between individual development and the whole organization development, you say that we still need to move away from this idea. So what does it mean exactly? So this is my first question. And the second question follows naturally. Okay? Let's assume that we move away from individual leadership development. Does it mean that now we don't need to develop individuals anymore? So this is a very important idea for organization, that this so-called leadership development need not be only the exclusive domain of the top senior leaders and sometimes the middle leaders promise to be in the top in the next 5 or 10 years and just neglecting the rest of the people.
That's right.
Yeah.
I agree. In fact, I think that many times we need to learn to listen more than learn to speak, and we're often taught to speak. No, this is something that is very emphasized. Presentation skills, very emphasized, but we need to go more into the listening
Mhm.
skills. How to do this practically.
Yes.
The book is actually quite practical. I couldn't put all of my ideas down. I wanted people to do some self-thinking. But if you ask me, of course, we are all at different levels in our own development. And not only are we at different levels, we all learn differently as
Yes.
well.
Yeah.
No, we don't find the same things appealing. So I just had last week somebody who enthusiastically picked up my book and she said, "Oh, don't you have a podcast, or don't you have something I can listen to, because it's easier for me than actually reading." So, I mean, it's a perfect example. Then I said to her, "Don't worry, there's a podcast coming. You can listen to that one then." At one point. But I think that that is exactly the beauty of what it will mean to develop human beings at the workplace and individuals outside the workplace as well, is that we have different starting points so we can help each other learn, and we can choose from a whole arena of, I mean, we are like painters with all these colors in front of us and different brushes, and we have the chance to listen, to read, to reflect, to share, to help each other grow. I don't see that as a problem. It is just very unusual for organizations to think of multi-layers
Yeah.
of learning instead of just crowding everybody into a room and saying, "Here, have a workshop on leadership."
Yeah.
This is
Beautiful. Yeah.
also maybe a nice, maybe it's part of this portfolio, but it cannot be the only way to move ahead. And I think also what is unfortunate and often neglected, again, there is so much wisdom and knowledge inside the organization, that in fact colleagues should be encouraged to sit together and share their thoughts and ideas. But in an environment where you're convinced it's all about the competition to get to the top, that's a very difficult thing to do, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And that needs to stop. That cannot be the reward setting that is encouraging. Somebody said to me, "We are naturally competitive." I said, "Who told you this? Who told you this? We naturally need each other. That's what we
That is the
naturally,
nature. Yes, absolutely.
right? That's the
150.
natural
Yeah.
thing. We
Yeah.
we need friends. We need running a
Connection
social
and belonging.
interaction,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
That's what we naturally need, even
Yeah.
as mammals. You can reduce it down to the biology of it.
Right.
But whether we are naturally competitive in this way that is set up in organizations, it would be another provocation to challenge this, right?
Yeah.
Especially when we all have enough to eat, because people will come with Maslow now, I know, but Maslow is also addressed in my book.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, in that case, how practically do you implement this? Because people may not be at the same level of development overall as human. And with reference to these particular skills, you're speaking about awareness, inner and outer inclusion. Maybe we can add humility to that. We can add also the ability, I mean, the idea of the ability to say something, and a culture which welcomes somebody who says something which is dissenting, not as a communist, but as an anarchist, if you want to say.
I mean, I think we could go on forever,
Yes.
Surya, right? There's so many different things to say, and you've listed a couple of them at the end. I think I have just enjoyed writing this book so much, and I hope it inspires readers to find more joy at the workplace, and that it's passed along in that spirit, right? And I would invite people to come back to me with their little stories and with their questions, and also to come back with me and say, "I don't agree with you." I find that okay. That's part of the learning process.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um, I think carefully about this football analogy. It is very powerful. That for one, and the other thing that the book, of course, entails, which we didn't touch on at all, is an actual compass
Yeah.
that can be used in conversation. So there is actually a tool in the book too, because I respect the fact that there are people who actually need tools, and tools can be very useful. So we didn't talk about that compass, but there is a compass there, and I think a lot of the readers will enjoy that as well.
Great.
So there are many things that you address in a very refreshing and provocative, but at the same time very gentle way. For example, you're speaking about performance in organization and how to manage that. So this is one very fascinating next chapter in your book. And the other one is about new work. What is new work? And I see it almost every day. I am sure many of our listeners have this Gen Z, which is totally apart, right? And 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 we're trying to address this so-called gap that we seem to have an experience with them. So this is also an area, a chapter that you're speaking about, and I would invite the listener to explore this with these little trailers. As a final word, what would you say, Neha, that we have not discussed and you think is important to share with our listeners? Is there something that you would like to say as a closure of our discussion?
So I certainly hope so, Surya. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. It's been fun.
Great, wonderful, Neha. Yeah, we'll catch up again, and I'm sure there will be some other occasion. It was really a pleasure having you with us.
You are listening to Sapience, special podcast series by SPJIN Institute of Management and Research, Mumbai. Brought to you by SPJIMR Centre for Wisdom and Leadership, produced by Vinita Dwivedi and the communications team.